You're with SBS Radio.
This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Philippa Carisbrook. There's been a 7.3 magnitude earthquake off Japan's northeast coast. 4 people have been killed. Over 90 others are injured. The quake struck just before midnight off the coast of Fukushima Prefecture. It triggered a tsunami warning, which has now been cancelled. A train derailed with around 100 people on board. There were no reports of injuries. In the capital, Tokyo, hundreds of thousands of homes temporarily lost power. Japan's government says there have been no reports of problems at the country's nuclear power plants. The government has warned of the potential for dangerous aftershocks. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, has called Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal for invading Ukraine. He's announced an additional $800 million in military aid to Ukraine and stated the US is committed to holding the Russian leader to account.
What's at stake here are the principles that the United States and the United Nations across the world stand for. It's about freedom. It's about the right of people to determine their own future.
The United States Federal Reserve has increased interest rates for the first time since 2018, and it has signalled up to 6 additional rate rises this year. The Federal Reserve says the increases are needed to prevent soaring inflation. The federal government has committed almost $500 million in the upcoming budget to build a new dam in central Queensland. Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce made the announcement. He says the Urana Dam project will deliver more infrastructure to regional centres, including Mackay and Gladstone. Over 1/3 of the water from the proposed dam has been allocated to the coal mining industry in the Bowen region. Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young says supporting the coal industry in this way makes a mockery of the government's own climate commitments.
And it does beg the question, is this something that the National Party's donors have asked for? Why is Barnaby Joyce being allowed to deliver this type of money?
The New South Wales opposition is calling for an investigation of what happened in the Northern Rivers flood disaster. Labour leader Chris Minns wants an upper house parliamentary inquiry into the flood response. He says the state government needs to learn from the mistakes it made. The Refugee Council of Australia is calling for the nation to increase the number of humanitarian visas it offers. It wants 20,000 places offered a year. A level like that was last seen in 2013. The council is also requesting a special additional intake of 20,000 places for Afghan refugees. President Yasmina Baratarovich-Hayward says Australia's 2021 refugee and humanitarian intake is at its lowest in 45 years. In sport, Serbian tennis star Novak Djokovic will be able to play at the French Open even if he's not vaccinated against COVID-19. Tournament officials say vaccination would not be required so long as the COVID-19 situation in France remains stable. I'm Philippa Carisbrook. This is SBS News in Easy English.
Want to hear more stories like this? Listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Philippa Carisbrook. Russia has denied Western claims that it's targeting civilians in Ukraine. Addressing the United Nations Security Council, its ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, said Russia was not behind the shelling of a theatre in the besieged city of Mariupol where people were sheltering. or the bombing of a maternity hospital. The United States ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, has accused Russia of attempting to use the council to spread misinformation. An organisation that monitors large companies has questioned why it took Australia 3 weeks to sanction 2 Russian oligarchs. The Australian Centre for Corporate Responsibility says the 2 businessmen should have been sanctioned immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine. Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne named those included in Australia's latest sanctions.
Today's listing includes the Russian National Wealth Fund, the Russian Ministry of Finance. With our recent inclusion of the Central Bank of Russia, we have now targeted all Russian government entities that are responsible for issuing and managing Russia's sovereign debt.
Community groups helping Ukrainians settle in Australia fear they won't be able to cope if requests for assistance rise. Australia has issued more than 4,000 visas to Ukrainians since the Russian invasion began. More than 500 people have arrived so far, with the peak body for Ukrainian groups in Australia receiving over 250 requests for accommodation. The Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations says groups have been able to handle requests so far, but they warn the flow of people out of Ukraine has only just begun, and soon cracks will emerge in the community's volunteer-run systems. Facebook owner Meta is being sued by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission over scam ads. The adverts featured prominent Australians backing money-making schemes they never endorsed. The ACCC will ask the federal court to impose financial penalties on Meta, alleging false, misleading or deceptive conduct. Users that clicked on the ads were encouraged to register for the scheme. Scammers then repeatedly called them, asking them to transfer money. The Federal Treasurer says next week's budget will deliver targeted relief to Australians struggling with the rising cost of living. Josh Frydenberg says he wants to put more money in people's pockets, but he has not given details about the measures he will take to achieve this. New South Wales has recorded an 8th case of Japanese encephalitis. The infected person is a man in his 50s from the Tamara area in the Riverina region. He was treated in hospital and is now recovering at home. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners is calling on GPs in Victoria to take on a new training program to better respond to domestic and family violence. Domestic and family violence services reported an increase in demand for their support during pandemic lockdowns. The Royal Commission into Family Violence has recommended GPs take professional development training to equip them with skills to combat the situation. RACGP President Dr. Karen Price says this will mean more victims can access the support they need.
Part of this training is to manage those types of disclosures and to make sure we endeavour to create a safety plan for that person. It doesn't mean that the disclosure risks their health or safety.
In sport, the detention of American basketballer Brittany Griner in Russia has been extended for at least 2 more months. The Olympic gold medalist was detained in Moscow last month for possession of cannabis oil in vape cartridges. A criminal investigation is underway. I'm Philippa Carisbrook. This is SBS News in Easy English.